Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for our weekly Hanauma Talk seminar series presented by the Hawaii Sea Grant Hanauma Bay Education Program. My name is Kamalani Johnson, and I am the Outreach Program Coordinator for the Education Program. First off, I'd like to introduce Malia Evans, who is the Education and Native Hawaiian Outreach Associate, as well as Kamalani Johnson, who is the Hawaiian Language Curriculum Specialist, and they will give a more in-depth introduction to their organization, as well as introducing our speakers for tonight. Kamalani is one of them. A few reminders before they do get started, though. Please keep all your questions till the end of the talk, or feel free at any time to type in a chat, and hopefully we can get to it at the end, or during the talk, the speakers can answer your questions. Also, please remember to turn off your microphone function as well as your video function to allow a smoother presentation. With that, Malia and Kamalani, would you introduce our two speakers for tonight, as well as doing your introductions for your organization?
Mahalo, Gavin. Aloha mai e nā lehu, and mahalo for joining us this month as we celebrate Mahina Olelo Hawaiʻi, Hawaiian Language Month. We have many people joining us from different parts of the world and from Hawaii, so please add your name and the place you are joining us from in the chat. Mahalo. This lecture series is possible through the amazing collaboration and partnerships between the Hanauma Bay Education Program, the NOAA Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument, and Hale Kuamo'o Hawaiian Language Center at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. The talks you'll hear throughout February will highlight the importance of historical Hawaiian language literature and the innovative applications of Olelo Hawai'i to mālama the natural and cultural resources of Papahanaumokuakea and Hawaii nei. Helping and presenting with tonight's talks are... Go ahead, Kamalani.
Aloha nui kākou, o wau keia o Kamalani Johnson, he kupa wau no ka hanau ahu e noho nei I Hilo, I waia keuka, I keia manawa. He mea ho'omohala haawina wau, ma ka hale Kuamo'o ma ke kula nui a Hawaii ma Hilo. Aloha nui kākou, my name is Kamalani Johnson. I'm originally from ka hanau ahu, now living in waia keuka in Hilo currently, and I am a curriculum developer with the Hale Kuamo'o at UH Hilo. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Kamalani. Kalani?
Aloha mai kākou, e nā hoa makamaka o wono o Kalani Quiocho no Hilo mai au ma Waiakea ma ka kapakai o ke okaha no ho wau ma Waiakea no Hawaii. And I also serve as the Native Hawaiian Program Specialist for Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument. Mahalo. Aloha.
Mahalo, Kalani. And Jenny?
Aloha mai kākou, o Jenny Crawford ko uinoa, no nanakuli mai au. Hana wau no Papahanaumokuakea me Kalani me Malia as the Education Specialist. Aloha.
Mahalo, Jenny. Aloha nui kākou, o wau o Malia Kalama Evans, no Hilo hanakahi mai au. My name is Malia. I live in Hilo and work in Education and Native Hawaiian Outreach on behalf of Papahanaumokuakea. So mahalo to all of you for joining us today, and mahalo to all of the supporters of Hawaiian language. E ola ka Olelo Hawai'i.
Okay. Aia o Papahanaumokuakea I waino ka paki pika akau, makahi o ka ekolu kaukani mile mai ka Aina puni o le kokoke loa, o ia ka pai moku ku kaawale loa o ka honua nei. Mamuli o ia ku kaawale loa ana I liliwewe ai na mea kanu a me na holoholona kukahi he nui. Wa nui na lahulu a paakumau Hawaii nei I loko o ke kia ho'omana'o, a ohe ona like ma ke kahi Aina. Wa nui no ho'i na kahua mo'o meheu kahiko a me na moku piholo a ho'ailona Aina kahiko.
Located in the central North Pacific, roughly 3,000 miles from the nearest continental landmass, Papahanaumokuakea is part of the remotest archipelago in the world. This isolation has led to the evolution of many unique plants and animals. A significant amount of species within the monument are endemic to Hawaii, found nowhere else on Earth. This area is also rich in ancient cultural sites and historic shipwrecks and landmarks.
O ke kia ho'omana o kaiapuni o Papahanaumokuakea, ke kahi o nā wahi malua nui loa ke au I ho'opalekana piha ia. Makahi o ka eono haneli kaukani o na mile kuea ma ka moana Pakipika. Ua ane e like me ka nui o ko ke kaiku'ono o Mekiko.
Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument and World Heritage Site is one of the largest fully protected conservation areas in the world. It encompasses nearly 600,000 square miles of the Pacific Ocean of our Moana Nui Akea, an area nearly the size of the Gulf of Mexico.
Ho'okele like ia ke kia ho'omana'o e ka hoa kahu waiwai. Ke ke'ena oihana kalepa ma o ka papaluna ho'okele moana a lewa puni au puni, ka oihana kuloko Amerika ma o ka oihana ia me ka holoholo na lohiu o Amerika, ka moku Aina o Hawai'i ma o ka oihana o na Aina me na kumu waiwai kulohelohe a me ke ke'ena kuleana Hawai'i o ia noho'i o Oha.
The monument is administered jointly by 4 co-trustees: the Department of Commerce through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries and National Marine Fisheries Service, Pacific Islands Regional Office, the Department of the Interior through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Pacific Region, National Wildlife Refuge System, and Pacific Islands Fish and Wildlife Office, the State of Hawaii through the Department of Land and Natural Resources, Division of Aquatic Resources and Division of Forestry and Wildlife, and the Office of Hawaiian Affairs.
Ho'okele like ua mau hoa kahu waiwai lai ke kia ho'omana'o e ho'omalu ai I nā kaiaola mai nā piko mauna mokupuni, I nā apapa kai kohola I ke kai hohonu, a me nā kumu waiwai mo o meheu e a'e o ke kia ho'omana'o.
These co-trustees together manage the monument to protect ecosystems ranging from terrestrial island peaks to shallow reefs to the deep sea, as well as other cultural resources within the monument. We're also happy to share that Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument will be celebrating its 15th anniversary on June 15, 2021. And we'll have more to share later. But let's get into tonight's presentation as we introduce our speakers.
Aloha e nā hoa. Kalani Quiocho was born in Hilo on the island of Hawaii and raised in part by his great-grandparents who were traditional Hawaiian medicinal healers. He grew up on a Hawaiian homestead along the shores of Hilo at the base of Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa. As a young native Hawaiian, Kalani was fascinated by people and places and the unique relationships among them. He has since committed himself to marine conservation and the indigenous contributions to local and global efforts. He is currently a part-time PhD student in the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Management at NOAA, and his research focuses on indigenous environmental governance and management systems. Kalani is building upon an academic background in Hawaiian studies from the Unuhi Aukukui School of Hawaiian Knowledge at NOAA and marine science from Hilo. Currently, Kalani works as a NOAA affiliate and serves as the Native Hawaiian Program Specialist for Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument. Welcome, Kalani.
Kamalani Johnson is a multi-generational native of the Ahiu Wind of Kahana, raised in the literary legacy of his ancestors. He is able to be of service to his community through this vibrant legacy he stewards. He is a language activist and historian from Kahana, Ko'olauloa, Oahu, and Waiakea Uka, Hilo, Hawaii is his home. 19th century Hawaiian language source materials are the foundation of his work as a Hawaiian language and literature instructor and as a curriculum developer and Hawaiian language editor for Kahakaula o Ke'elikolani. He makes it a point to integrate ancestral knowledge derived from source materials in his work as a hook from which interest is sparked in his students and peers alike. As a famous historian, Zephyrin Ke'au'okalani proclaimed, far-seeking Hawaii's knowledge base is vast. The Hawaiian language literary legacy is vast and unsurpassed. It is also the focal point from which his work stems, which strives to serve as a vessel through which Hawaiian knowledge is accessible to the masses. Aloha and welcome to Kalani and Kamalani.
Okay, aloha nui kako e nā hoa. Okay, so let me just get this slide up there. Okay. Okay. Kalani hiki ke ike ia, ka'u.
Hiki no.
Okay, me ka iloa. Okay, aloha nui kako e nā hoa I akua kua mai nā pe'a like ole o Hawaii pai Aina aloha nui o kou. O wau o Kamalani, he mea ho'omohala ha'awina wau ma ka hale Kuamo'o. Eia ka maua o Kalani e ho'ike ike aku ana I keia la. And so our presentation today is titled Ola ka Olelo Hawai'i o ka ho'ola ho'okluma I ka Olelo Hawai'i ma ka 5 lau kumuwaiwai Papahanaumokuakea, touching upon and presenting on, and it was now what, 3 years collaboration between Hale Kuamo'o, Kahaka'ula o Ke'eli Kolani and NOAA on the translation and delivery of some resources that have been developed for Papahanaumokuakea into Olelo Hawai'i. I won't jump into that. We'll jump into that when we get there. And so before we jump into it, I wanted to just touch on this ki'i that we have here in the beginning. And we have several Olelo No'eau, several proverbs in Olelo Hawai'i that talk about this place where this picture is, which is at Kumukahi, Ha'e, where the sun first rises. And so I thought it would be very, very fitting to showcase this ki'i here as it reminds us of that that saying that that Malia mentioned, that Kepelino said, "Ahukupanaha ya Hawaii miloa." The knowledge base of Hawaii is so vast that it runs from the place that the sun rises in Kumukahi, the very first place, all the way to the other end. And that end doesn't stop at Ni'ihau. It's going and going and going through Papahanaumokuakea, and you folks will see what that looks like in the resources that have been prepared today. Kalani he manao, mamo ka ho'omau ana.
Leo homau.
Okay, make that easy. Okay, so the collaboration, we're going to talk about how it started, and the collaboration is between Kahaka'ula Ke'eli Kolani Hale Kuamo'o and NOAA. And Kahaka'ula Ke'eli Kolani, for those that are not familiar, is the College of Hawaiian Language at the University of Hawaii at Hilo, whose namesake is Ruth Ke'eli Kolani, and was named for her and her staunch beliefs and her efforts, her activism in Olelo Hawai'i. And I wouldn't necessarily call it activism, but it's kind of the closest word that I can think of right now. She was just being Hawaiian, yeah. And so, and she believed very, very intensely about the power of Olelo Hawai'i, and she lived Olelo Hawai'i every single day. Yeah, and so o ka olelo ke ka'au ka maoli is a leading principle of Kahaka'ula Ke'eli Kolani, that language is in every single thing that we do. It's the fiber that binds us to our identity, and that's exactly what Kahaka'ula embodies in the work that we do every day. Under Kahaka'ula Ke'eli Kolani, we have the Hale Kuamo'o Hawaiian Language Center, which is actually the research division of Kahaka'ula Ke'eli Kolani, which strives to uplift Olelo Hawai'i as a living language, every day in the things that we do as a resource center in developing curriculum materials, puke keiki, children's books for the Kula Kaiapuni, the Hawaiian language newspaper Namaka Okana, which is a Hawaiian language community newspaper, and in being of service to provide Hawaiian language workshops for families, for teachers, for Kumu, as well as Hawaiian language text materials for university levels and for various communities. And in all of that, in a lot of the curriculum development that we do, there's a high saturation point in social studies materials, because that's where a lot of our work is at. But we don't develop enough culture-based, mo'omehau-based, science-rooted Hawaiian language materials. And so this is kind of where we're focusing today, in the value of those types of collaborations, like this one between Hale Kuamo'o Kahaka'ulo Ke'eli Kolani and NOAA. And so this picture right here is actually an example of some of the things that we developed. This is a Pelaha Olelo No'eau, an Olelo No'eau Hawaiian language proverb posters. I don't know if some people may have seen it. It's everywhere, you know. And so a part of this process in this collaboration is onboarding, which is an important process. We identified these resource materials that you guys will see later on, which are inclusive of maps, brochures, materials for moku papapa, these materials that were developed for Papahanaumokuakea and in the point of translating them into Olelo Hawaiʻi. And so in the translation process, we decided that it was really important to onboard and to teach, to have the next generation of Hawaiian language speakers learn how the process of translation and preparing materials in that way. And so in this process, we paired a senior professor, Dr. Kalana Silva, in mentoring some of our younger graduate students in Kahaka'ulo Ke'eli Kolani. And we could have just well, you know, had hit, you know, our Kalana Silva translate it and be done with it. But it's very important that these skills are being passed down to the next generation, so that the next generation of stewards are carrying this kuleana, this responsibility on. And it was a little bit more work, but it was worth it, because having the legacy go on is really important, so that the work doesn't stop with the one person. And in doing this and taking the time to onboard, then that skill set is going to be applicable to wherever that student takes it, whether they're going to stay in Hawaiian language, whether they're going to move into another field, another career path, business, science, whatever it is. But they're more informed in whichever path they decide to go on. And in this process, one of the types of the resources that were translated were maps, are Palapala Aina, yeah, which are really special, because the Palapala Aina, which Kalani will talk about a little bit more later on, are really, some people might not think that the translation of a map is very important, you know, because it doesn't have that much verbiage. It has a lot of imagery. There's names, but there's written code in our Inoa Aina, in our Hawaiian language, place names. And by having these place names in Olelo Hawai'i, in the name, the traditional names, we're also reclaiming those Inoa Aina, those spaces. And when these posters, these maps are everywhere visually in our community, in our schools, English medium schools, Hawaiian medium schools, university level, wherever it is, preschool, punana leo, we're also reclaiming Olelo Hawai'i for those spaces, and so that we bring back those names. And Kalani will touch on what I mean when I talk about that. And going back to the idea of ola ka Olelo Hawai'i, in order for Olelo Hawai'i to ola, to thrive, to live, and ola doesn't just mean to exist, yeah? Ola means it to be in a state of thriving. Yeah, it must be present in informal spaces, not only the formal ones. Yeah, and so in order to achieve that, one of the ways we get there is the visual presence of Olelo Hawai'i, roadways, signs, hearing it outside, and having the eyes see it. Yeah, whether you might not hear it, having the visual there is important in reclaiming Olelo Hawai'i in those spaces. And when we have it there visually, it necessitates its attention, it necessitates attention and funding, it necessitates people to learn it, so that we do achieve that the goal, right, which is for Olelo Hawai'i to ola. And so as important as it is, yeah, to reclaim these spaces, you know, mental and spiritual spaces for Olelo Hawai'i, a lot of, you know, from the 70s, from the 80s, and through the Renaissance, and, you know, from Hawaiian language being reinstated as an official language of Hawaii, it's been 40 years, you know, and so there's been 40 years of reclaiming, yeah, space for Olelo Hawai'i. It's just as important to see it visually, and that does take funding, yeah. Reclaiming mental and spiritual space doesn't take too much. It's not too taxing on the pocket. However, visual reclamation of space does take some money, and Olelo Hawai'i is worth it. And so it's very important that we keep that at the forefront of the conversations that we're having, and having space for these Palapala Aina, yeah, for these maps that that have been translated. Necessitate its importance. Papahanaumokuakea's importance in our homes, yeah, in our schools, yeah, because Papahanaumokuakea is such a great resource, and is such an untapped resource for our schools, for our keiki, in whatever level you're at. And so it's important to have those visual reminders for all of for all that knowledge, you know, all of that ike that has been there and that is here and that will be here for us moving forward into the future. And so transitioning, we wanted to show this picture of the ama'u because it illustrates how we're going to get to that space of ola, yeah. So the ama'u, if we kind of look at the imagery, it looks like a spine, yeah. It functions as a spine, and that's exactly what Olelo Hawai'i is. Olelo Hawai'i is a succession of words, of stories, of knowledge transmission from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And the people here in Hawaii and Hawaiian knowledge, we're all products of that succession, similar to this ama'u. And so it's important that in the next line of the succession, we take on that kuleana. Yeah, we awamo that kuleana to carry Olelo Hawai'i, to hapai ika Olelo Hawai'i iluna, at whatever level you're at. And whether you're Hawaii or not, everyone living in Hawaii, it's important that everyone in Hawaii carries this kuleana in whatever way that is, yeah, in various levels of support in whatever way that looks like, yeah. And so it's important, and so that's kind of the imagery we wanted to evoke here with this mana'o for the ama'u. We want succession, yeah, mo'o. We want it to mo'o. We want it succession, and in succession, the kuleana also succeeds person to person and generation to generation. Okay.
Iola. Mahalo Kamalani. If you could return to the ama'u for, I would love to add on some mana'o. Just thinking about succession, I will succeed you, but I'll proceed with sharing that Papahanaumokuakea over time has acknowledged that we have a genealogy, a management genealogy. And that's actually an outcome of a lot of Native Hawaiian contributions. Native Hawaiian values have been incorporated into the management of the monument at every level. And we can, those of us who manage, who have the privilege of managing or caring for this place, try really hard to cultivate these perspectives, these Native Hawaiian contributions into the management, because we certainly are place-based managers and we need to learn what that means and allow the place to really inform how it should be cared for. So I wanted to just share that we have a mo'oku auhau as well. And I wanted to share a little bit about how our mo'oku auhau has led us to this great work. So the next slide, why does PMNM or Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument work on Hawaiian language projects? Well, as I kind of started to say that for the past 2 decades, Native Hawaiians have contributed, and it was very early on. It was actually before the designation of the monument, when it was the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands Coral Reef Ecosystem Reserve. And Native Hawaiians were strong advocates, as Ke'elikolani was, being Hawaiian. One of the first profound activities of resurgence by Native Hawaiians was the repatriation of iwi-kupuna on Nihoa and Mokumanamana. The Coral Reef Ecosystem Reserve was designated in 2000. But since then, there has always been an acknowledgement of the unique rights and responsibilities that Native Hawaiians have, certainly expressed in English. And as we see this influence progress over 2 decades, Hawaiian language continues to show up in our management documents. The second part of that is that these rights and responsibilities become codified in law and policy. That's really important. And then thirdly, the implementation or walking the talk. So PMNM has continuously strived to incorporate these contributions, Native Hawaiian contributions, practically into every aspect of the monument. And I'll give you an example. I was just working on this document this morning. We have a Hawaiian language orientation guideline for our new PMNM employees, basically giving them a background on Hawaiian language, how to use it in PMNM management, where it shows up in our management documents, and even how to use it in English text. Sometimes people add S's at Hawaiian words, or they add, very short translations or interpretations of our language, perhaps out of context sometimes. So there's some really great things that have been incorporated into the management of the monument, because cultural heritage management is not just about stuff, right? Tangible things, but it's also about the values, right? The language, the intangible components of cultural heritage, that substance that's probably more substantial or more of the culture than anything that is tangible. I wanted to highlight the Keala Nu'ukia no Papahanaumokuakea. This is the mission of Papahanaumokuakea. It is to carry out seamless integrated management to ensure ecological integrity and achieve strong long-term protection and perpetuation of Northwestern Hawaiian Islands ecosystems, Native Hawaiian culture, and heritage resources for current and future generations. That's very profound. And so you can already see Native Hawaiian culture is a huge part of our component, one of the reasons why we have a Native Hawaiian program and a lot of Native Hawaiian issues. And next slide, please. And we see more of this, more Hawaiian language showing up in our designation laws beginning in 2006 when the monument was designated. If you had to pick one Hawaiian word to be in a law, pono is pretty good. And it was actually defined too in the proclamation as means appropriate, correct, and deemed necessary by traditional standards in the Hawaiian culture. Now I want to share with you that Native Hawaiians who were working in the agency at the time contributed this. Traveled to DC, contributed these Hawaiian words and these perspectives, and so pono was put into the proclamation. It was in the context of identifying the appropriate Native Hawaiian practices that were permittable in the monument, making sure that we had clear boundaries of Native Hawaiian involvement that were self-determined by Native Hawaiians. What you see in 2007 is that the monument was given its Hawaiian name. Now this name was offered by Auntie Puakana Hale to the cultural working group of the monument. And the group confirmed the name, and later 2007, of course, it was renamed Papahanaumokuakea by a presidential proclamation. So this cultural working group got the president to send out another proclamation to rename the monument, which is pretty huge. Recently, the other presidential proclamation that includes Hawaiian words is the expansion proclamation. In 2016, President Obama expanded it about 4 to 5-fold, and included these Hawaiian words, ao, po, and hokule'a. It was in the context of identifying that this place was important to our cosmology. That's huge. And also identifying that this space was really important to our voyaging and wayfinding practices. That's another really, really important thing and function of this place. And we're grateful that this recognition of that function of this place was incorporated into these laws, and therefore makes it down into our policies. So oftentimes we do take the perspective of the place as a person, or the place as someone that consults us, right? The source. Next slide, please. And then later on, so those are the designation laws. This is how it kind of shows up in our management. So the 2008 Monument Management Plan, there are 22 action plans, 2 of which are focused on Native Hawaiian initiatives. And this is when there were so many Hawaiian words that were introduced into management. You have hokule'a, va'a, mele, hula, mo'olelo, ho'okupu, and then kupuna, kapu, konohiki. These are really important concepts and ideas and knowledge systems related to these words. You can imagine what is being talked about in the management plan when these words come about, but it's offering all of these perspectives and this context for traditional resource management, if you will. And then in 2010, when the United States, as well as the state of Hawaii, Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and NOAA tried to, or proposed Papahanaumokuakea as a World Heritage Site, the proposal included many Hawaiian words. These are just some of them, but basically to make the case that this was a culturally and naturally significant place. And so this document really expanded and interpreted the site, and even allowed UNESCO to identify it as the first cultural seascape. That's really profound as well, because before that, culture wasn't conferred on the seascape. It was thought that people don't live there, and so that it's void of any cultural meaning. So that's a really important contribution that Papahanaumokuakea and people of place have contributed to global conversations regarding culture. Next slide, please. And so why do we do Olelo Hawai'i work, and how does it contribute to PM and management? Well, language is culture. And if you remember the mission, we are to protect and perpetuate Native Hawaiian culture. It's also identity, as Kamalani had said. It's the threads of everything we do, right? Hawaiian languages in everything we do. And so when we're working with Native Hawaiian communities, when we're working with local Hawaii communities, and we're recognizing this place as a Hawaiian place, it's important to use Olelo Hawai'i. Olelo Hawai'i is also provides access to knowledge, as Kamalani had said. And the language itself is its own repository for its knowledge, and taken out of context, it cannot be understood fully. And so Olelo Hawai'i is important. When we're doing work like cultural keystone species research and looking at NUPEPA, primary Hawaiian language resources, Hawaiian language is important for us to gather those cultural data so that we can incorporate it into our management, on par with things like the economic and social factors that we incorporate into our assessments and management. And then lastly, because we are in a natural and cultural World Heritage Site, because of the laws and the policies that guide our management, Hawaiian language revitalization and normalization is part of our kuleana to focus on biocultural conservation and restoration. So we often talk about how natural resources are cultural resources, yeah? And so this is an extension of that idea, that when we're focusing on primarily a natural resource, there are cultural implications to our work. And we also communicate that to our constituents, especially our permittees, researchers, or others who access the monument, that their activities, regardless of what kind of permit they have, whether it's education or a special ocean use permit or a conservation management permit or a Native Hawaiian practices permit, that all of their activities have some kind of contribution, impact to cultural and natural resources, cultural resources especially, just because it's not thought of top of mind. Next slide, please. And so I'll turn it to Kamalani to introduce this ki'i to you.
Okay, so coming back to this mana'o of ola, right? Mahalo nui to Kalani for talking about the monument and the laws, and these are all really important progressions, yeah, holomua, in where we want to go, yeah. And so the ama'u is one image of what ola looks like, yeah, what thriving looks like. And for those that may be familiar with Hilo, maybe might recognize this body of vai here, which is waya nue nue, and kind of links back to actually the word that I use is holomua. The way that water moves, yeah, water moves forward, yeah, it moves forward fluid, and ola isn't static, yeah, ola is fluid, and to achieve that, the work that we must do must move forward, yeah. And so in this next section, we're gonna it's gonna be pieced together, yeah. You guys will see some images of the things that were developed under this collaboration, which do aid in this idea of achieving the goal, right? Which is ola ka Olelo Hawai'i. And this idea is not a new idea. Yeah, this idea is not a new idea. It has been a part of the driving force of organizations like the Punana Leo, yeah, and Eola ka Olelo Hawai'i. And so this idea of ola has been the driving force for a lot of movements, for the Punana Leo, for the kula kaiapuni, kula kaia Olelo, the Hawaiian-immersion schools, so that we move forward, just as the vai moves. So must we, and so must Olelo Hawai'i in the succession that where we are heading. Yeah. Okay.
I kako those mana'o, and also to just contribute that when we think about these resources for Papahanaumokuakea, definitely vai, yeah, definitely important and rich. And we've identified that we can definitely reuse these resources because we have these translations. For instance, when developing narratives or interpretation on our website, or when we're interpreting at Moku Papapa Discovery Center, we can use the Hawaiian language translations as actually scripts. Even though we're not fluent, and those of us who have speaking proficiency can use it to interpret to visiting schools, or provide access to Hawaiian language on our website. But let's go into the resources, shall we?
Yes, right. I just have to add something onto what you just said. Although and the fluency is a big issue that people always bring up, and although a person may not be fluent, or they don't have working fluency in Olelo Hawai'i, that doesn't mean that Olelo Hawai'i is any less important. Yeah, and so even in spaces where people most likely won't be fluent in Olelo Hawai'i, it's still just as important to have it visually be present in that space, like Kalani is talking about. I just wanted to touch on that.
Okay. So just thinking about Waya Nue Nue, the reason why we chose these 8 resources was for broad impact. Now, just thinking about the Wailuku River and broad impact, some of you may resonate with that mana'o, but the idea was looking at pushing the boundaries of normalcy. Where can we provide these resources where they would have broad impact? Yeah, so some of the things that we've considered in broad impact is audience, as well as purpose of use, and the places where these resources would exist. Just to go down the line, so the RAC card is basically a card that would sit in on the front desk of a visitor center, per se, or it would be included in a communication or a media folder to brief media. So this interprets the NOAA Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, which is where Papahanaumokuakea is situated in NOAA. Now, the brochures for the site and the brochures for Moku Papapa Discovery Center, they're also provided in the same places. But it also, just thinking about the normalcy of providing a brochure in Hawaiian language is very, very novel. Now, Kamalani had mentioned some of the maps. And so these are map posters. and you have one of Papahanaumokuakea, as well as one that includes all of the, or most of the names for each of the islands and brief interpretations. And I'll go over each of these in detail. And then the two other ones were activity sheets. So one was a coloring hidden picture activity sheet, another was maze. This is probably going to be used at outreach events. And then I put ho'okupu here. It's a Gyotaku Limu press cards. An example is the image on the slide. I'll talk about this more, but we've used this actually to present to guests or to partners, small mementos. But on the back of these cards, there's interpretations of these species. And so now we have interpretations both in Olelo and English. And so some people have this in Rapa Nui, or sister site in Rapa Nui, as well as across Chile, because we do international work as well. So providing Olelo Hawaiʻi basically provides that sense of place. And that's important, especially outside of Hawaii, when we're working with partners who identify us as a natural and cultural World Heritage Site as well. Next slide, please. So these are the images of the Kumuvaivai, the resources. You see 7 here, and I'll show you the 8th one at the end. That's the cards I mentioned for Gyotaku and Limu. But very diverse. There's a lot of Hawaiian language content on these resources. And like I said, we can easily repurpose some of these translations for exhibits or for online, for websites and other purposes. So we're really excited about that. And I'll share where we plan to use some of these materials beyond their states right now. Next slide, please. So Olaka Olelo Hawaiʻi, so talking about reclaiming space, this one is quite literally. So Moku Papapa, so Kikikowai Nakaunana o Moku Papapa is located in downtown Hilo. And you know, currently Olelo Hawaiʻi primarily exists in schools and in the homes of Hawaiian language speakers. And that is changing, yes, definitely, but its current state is primarily in those locations. Now, a site like this that has bilingual interpretation is so extremely critical to Hawaiian language existence and preservation, because it pushes outside of those expected places, and it puts it out into the public areas that we don't expect it, which is great, because it's expanding that area of existence for Hawaiian language, reclaiming those spaces. Yeah. And so Moku Papapa provides that bilingual interpretation. Our staff do an amazing job of caring for this place. This is a community center of sorts. It's an innovation center. We are hopeful that we can do more collaborations with Olelo Hawaiʻi practitioners and researchers, scholars, those who are looking for spaces to advance Olelo Hawaiʻi. So please welcome to this place. It is your place. We are public servants, and we look forward to when we open again. But in the meantime, I'm sure somebody will drop a website link. You can visit us at papahanaumokuakea.gov. Next slide, please. So this is really great too. This one kind of was the first example of me kind of like going wow to ourselves, was these Hawaiian language logos. Before, the blue one was the one that we had used for years, and we hadn't planned on this, but you know, Kahi Fuji, who had reformatted all of the resources once we got the Hawaiian language translations, he asked, oh, should we also translate the logo? And I didn't think about that. But this is also, you know, just an example of how integrated our office is. Everyone is thinking about these things. And so he had asked, like, should we be translating this too? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And when it came out, I was so excited just to see it like that. It was so impactful. I can't even explain how, but I hope that it resonates with you in similar ways. But having these kinds of logos, signages, right? Like Kamalani has said, everywhere provides that normalcy. Yeah, so much that we don't even have to talk about normalcy in years to come. But this is a profound contribution to that as well. Next slide, please. So Olakai no Aina. So this is borrowing the title of our first presentation of the month, honoring the contributions of Kekuawa Kikiloi, Kepo'okeli, Pa'akaua, and Kamaka'i Laua, Kaula. Their presentation identified the use of these names, how they came about, and the important stories that are connected to them. And that's my same message to you, that these names are connected to indigenous knowledge systems. They provide unique histories, unique stories. And without these names, we can't query the Hawaiian language newspapers for any information associated to these names. They also convey a sense of place. When you see these Hawaiian names on a map, when you see these names being used. And what's so comforting is that many of our researchers who do a lot of groundwork up in Papahanaumokuakea are also using these names. You know, there was a time when Mokumanamana was known as Necker Island. Many people used that name. And then the monument, I think many people were pushing forward on using the name Mokumanamana, and now it's common use. We still use Necker Island in certain circumstances, especially when it comes to research, because there's been so much research done on some of these places that in order for us to keep that mo'okuauhau of research, these names are also referenced. It's important for us to have all of the data collected at these sites. So these names, as in another example, right? These names provide access to knowledge, just like Necker Island provides access to some of these peer-reviewed journals that have been done in prior years. But just to highlight that all of these names provide different relationships or different connections for people. So some people use one name versus another, and we acknowledge that that's their pilina. So that's also an important contribution, I think, and important to remember, because there was a time when we did not know these names. And I just want to acknowledge, I see Larry Kimura on the line, just want to acknowledge that the Hawaiian Lexicon Committee was crucial in conferring new names for Papahanaumokuakea at a time when we did not know our names. So I just wanted to acknowledge the contribution of the committee and everyone else who've ho'ola these names. Next slide, please. This one was really interesting too. So this was kind of another learning opportunity. I'm using the title of Hoku Kodi and Hoku Pihana, Nunului Kalani, profound excuse me, I can't even speak right now, profound reverberations in the heavens. But Olelo Hawaiʻi is also Hawaiian place-based thinking. And I'm pointing you to this excerpt that comes from the coloring hidden activity sheet. There's a description on this Casper octopus, and Dr. Silva basically called it a he'e-hane-hane. A he'e is an octopus, most of you probably know that, and hane-hane means like ghostly. And so he named this he'e-hane-hane. And so that's important too, because this is Hawaiian self-determination, right? Using language to name things. And this last phrase right here in English says, that's about half as tall as Mount Everest, talking about the depth that this octopus was found. And in the Hawaiian version, when we got it, man, I was so elated to see that translation come out where it says, almost the height of Mauna Loa. And that was really, really important to have that in there, because it was drawing back to the source. Yeah, where are we based? Where is our perspective based from? And Mauna Loa is much more pili to our communities than Mount Everest, even though we know about it. But Mauna Loa is something that most of us have seen, right? Like more than Everest. It's relatable. It's also pili to the Ikeku'una that we have. And also, it's also pili. There's a lot of kauna in Mauna Loa, pili to the kai, that you might find in there as well. And so these kinds of references are really important, because I remember a time when I was growing up in grade school when we would honor the holidays or the seasons. And then, you know, when the teachers would put up different decorations, you would see like squirrels and acorns and autumn leaves. And I couldn't connect to that. I didn't see those things. I saw mongooses and mangoes and things like that. And so this is really important that we're shifting, right? We're becoming more culturally appropriate in the way that we're delivering information to our audience members. And if they don't know what Mauna Loa is, right? Well, if they can't speak Hawaiian, they might not know. But if we use Mauna Loa in the English even, that would cause people to look up what is Mauna Loa, right? And dig a little bit deeper into our place. Next slide, please. Okay, so speaking of maps, this map is called Aina Moana. It was created by an unknown person. There's an engraving, but we can't understand it. It was taken, or it was made in 1840. It was taken from this document called He Mau Palapala Aina a me Naniele Piliana. And it was created at a time when Hawaiian language was the primary language of Hawaii. And therefore the education system was administered in Hawaiian language. What we see decades after is this shift that English, but also foreign thinking were shifting the education system. And this map, as you see it centralized on Hawaii, started to shift a little bit towards the continent and put the continent in the middle, and Hawaii was on the margins. And so we already see this impact happening. And so what we're trying to do, as Kamalani said, is reclaim that space. So the next image is an image that we created, also Kahi created. He, next slide, please. He reformatted the Office of National Marine Sanctuary site map. So this is the office within NOAA that the monument is located within. So Ka'onai Hana Wahikana Hokaiapuni is the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. And we have 14 sites and 2 monuments. But you can also see here is that all of the sites are translated. Yeah, all of the different geographic references are translated, and that's really, really important too, as Kamalani had said. So the rack card image is on the right-hand margin. You can see it in its full. But this image was delivered to the director of the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, and he was very pleased to see this, especially with all of the initiatives regarding Indigenous leadership and conservation is going on. And we are going to put this on our website soon. So that's great news that we've gotten that support all the way from headquarters for NOAA. And we look forward to integrating more Hawaiian language materials on our website as we can do, especially with the partnership with Hale Kuamo'o, which we're really grateful for. Oh, just to mention also that in this process, we also translated all of the agency names, and which is what you heard in the interpretation at the beginning of the trustees. So all of those agencies and offices were translated. Before that, they were not translated. They weren't found in Mamakakaya, the Hawaiian language, Hawaiian Modern Language Dictionary. Thank you. Next slide. And then these are the Gyotaku and Limu cards. And what I want to highlight with this one is that several names were conferred or just used to interpret these species. And also the researchers that collected these and did the Gyotaku prints and the Limu presses are Native Hawaiian. So we have Keolohilani Lopes. He's a PMNM field tech. He was a part of this team that collected some of these species. And Kale did the Gyotaku prints aboard the NOAA ship, Hi'ialakai, which is really interesting. If you didn't know that NOAA had a ship, it was decommissioned, but we had a ship called Hi'ialakai. And this was named by Auntie Isabella Iona Abbott of Hanauma. She's known as the first Hawaiian to obtain a PhD and probably is still the premier phycologist on Pacific algae. But that's just part of our mo'oku. And the researcher that did the Limu presses is her haumana, Dr. Randy Kosaki. And he is our research coordinator for the monument. He did these aboard the Hi'ialakai as well. He's been with the monument for 20 years. So these are important stories to highlight through this type of work. And we are currently working with Hale Kuamo'o on a NOAA career book for the Kula Kaiapuni Hawaiian language schools. And this is especially important, as Kamalani said, because we need more STEM related content in our middle and high schools. And that's why this project is important as well. So I just wanted to, that was very brief, but I just wanted to share some of the highlights, some of the lessons that we've come across in this great work. And the last thing that I would like to share with you, next slide please, is this quote by Dr. Lilikala Kame'elehiva. And she says, to lose your language is to lose the soul of your culture. And when the language is gone, you are forever disconnected from the wisdom of your ancestors. The loss of language inevitably results in losing the gods you pray to, the land you live on, and your own government and sovereignty. And so this and many more reasons why this work is important. And I'm just very grateful to all of you for your contributions to the revitalization and normalization of Hawaiian language. Olelo Hawai'i. Kamalani.
I did it again. I started talking when I was on mute. Mahalo nui e Kalani. And so kind of looking at this, one thing that I really liked about what Kalani mentioned is in space, like his Mauna Loa example is one big thing is challenging the status quo and disrupting. I think disrupting is something that's important within reason. Disrupting the status quo to provide something that's better, yeah, and that's more in tune with the environment that we're wanting. And so looking at this image here, yeah, we have this low koa, we have this koa here, and going back to that idea of ola, yeah, and in order for us to achieve what that is, yeah, it's important for us to embody koa, what this is, yeah, to challenge boundaries, to dare to go where collaborations may not have been before. Yeah, and the reason why a lot of great things happen is because people dare to go there because no one went there before. And 40 years after Hawaiian language being reinstated as an official language happened because people challenged it. People challenged the status quo, people disrupted the system that was in place and fought for the things that we have today. And there has been a lot of leaps, a lot of strides for Olelo Hawai'i, and there's a lot more leaps and a lot more strides that we need to go to. And in NOAA, there have been holomua, there have been, progressions here and there in the law, in the logo, in verbiage, in the website, all these different things. These are leaps and these are strides, but this isn't it. Yeah, and these are stones. These are stones to reach that goal, and that's going to be possible when we embody this idea of koa. Yeah, to challenge the systems that are in place so that we can create a new system that serves us better and that serves our people better. And so closing us out, I wanted to provide this image for those that may not be familiar with Hawaii Island. This is in Puna. This is near Kealakomo and Hale. And going back to this idea that I brought up in the beginning, which is Ahu kupanaha ya Hawaii imilo, and how fitting we have a path here in Allah. And so looking back to this idea that just because something isn't in front of us, just because something isn't happening already, doesn't mean it doesn't have the capacity to happen. And looking and assessing at the systems that are in place and assessing if it works for us right now, and if it doesn't work for us as it should be working for us, how can we make it better and how can we move forward? And so going back to this, the idea of this collaboration, we want, it happened 3 years ago and kind of on a whim, and a lot has come from it. And we do it for the future and for those that are learning Olelo Hawai'i, for the public. We do it for the keiki, for the children that are coming up, so that they're better than we are, where we're standing today. And so just like what Kepelino said, he said that the knowledge base is vast. Yeah, and so there's so much that's untouched. And we touched on just a little speck for Papahanaumokuakea, and we hope to continue this collaboration so that we can touch on more specks and it grows into a puddle, and then it grows into a punawai, and it grows into a kai, and it grows into a large ocean of impact for Hawaii. And so that is what we are wanting to leave you folks with today. And I recognize some familiar faces, and mahalo to Kalani for recognizing Larry. Aloha, Larry, who came today, and mahalo to him for all his contributions over the years. Yeah. And as well as everyone here that has taken the time out to today, this Thursday evening, to spend with us with our project for Papahanaumokuakea. Mahalo.
Mahalo.
Mahalo nui to all of you. We just want to let you know that this and previous webinars will be archived at the Hanauma Bay Education Programs YouTube page, where you'll also find the previous talks. And Gavin has posted his email for those of you that have any questions. So, Kalamai, we didn't have time for questions, but if you have anything burning, you can send it to Gavin and he'll be sure to send it over to Jenny. But mahalo nui Kalani, Kamalani. We appreciate your mana'o and all of the good work that you have been doing. We just hope you all have enjoyed our Mahina Olelo Hawaiʻi Hawaiian Language Month webinar series. I want to thank all of our presenters during the last month. Eola ka Olelo Hawaiʻi, the Hawaiian language lives. Aloha.
Eola.
With that, thank you all for joining us for tonight's Hanauma Talk seminar series. Like they said, if you guys do have any questions, since we didn't have time, feel free to send them my way, and I'll hopefully send it to them soon. Thank you guys all for joining us for this month. Very informative talks during this month. Hope you guys all can make it for next week's talk. We'll be hosting the City and County of Honolulu's Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. A whole new topic. So hopefully you guys all can join us for that that month. But with that, you guys all have a great night. Thank you all, and night.
Mahalo nui.
Aloha, mahalo nui.
Mahalo nui kako, aloha.
Aloha.